Hello and welcome to Session 7 of Writers Essential's 12-part novel writing programme, Novel Writing pages 1 to 384. My name is Sarah Hull and I'm the Creative Director for Writers Essentials. This session, titled Got a Novel Idea, is the first in the second half of the course looking at how to edit a novel. Sessions 1 to 6 on how to plan a novel are available via our website www.writeressentials.com and on YouTube. So now you've got those 50, 80, 100,000 words down on the page, what do you do with them? How do you tempt a publisher into publishing your finished novel and a reader into buying it? It's a wonderful moment when you've finished your story and you're really excited to show it to someone, maybe even make some money out of it. But before you send your novel off into the great wide world, you need to know a few things. Number one, this probably isn't going to outsell Harry Potter. The stories we hear about books making millions, selling all over the world and being made into blockbuster movies are newsworthy because they're rare. What we don't hear about is the thousands of other books that are published and go mostly unnoticed. Number two, the publishing world is really competitive. Getting a debut novel published is extremely difficult. The process involves a lot of hard work, patience, and dealing with rejection. Publishers receive thousands of new submissions every year and most of them don't get picked up. Of the manuscripts which do make it to publication, only a minority actually end up in the bookshops. Number three, if you want to write professionally, you need to be professional. As I've said before, there's nothing wrong with just writing for yourself. But if you want your work to be read by somebody else, and preferably bought by them, you need to take it seriously and you need to write something that's worth reading. To stand the best chance of getting your book published, and for this I'm focusing on commercial publishing, where somebody else pays to produce your book, your priority needs to be the end user, because it's the people parting with their hard-earned money which keeps the industry going. They are vital. So, if you want to enter the publishing world, you're best off understanding how it works. For this, I'm going to be looking at three things: the publisher, the market, and the editing process. So first of all, the publisher. Of course, not all publishing houses are the same, but generally this is the process your book will have to go through in order to end up published. New submissions go to the editorial department and end up in what is affectionately called the slush pile. A junior editor, or quite often an intern, will then go through the new submissions and sort them into a no and a maybe pile. This is generally based on the cover letter, the synopsis, and up to the first 70 pages of the manuscript. A good filter for what goes into the maybe pile is the question, do you want to keep reading? Manuscripts from the no pile will sometimes be returned by post, if the author has included a stamped addressed envelope with the correct postage, along with a letter informing the author that their submission has been unsuccessful. Occasionally, that letter will include some degree of feedback, but generally publishers simply do not have time to provide this and therefore will use a generic rejection letter. The maybe pile is then passed on to a senior or commissioning editor who assesses whether or not they think the publishing company should publish each manuscript. Some submissions fall down at this stage, not because they aren't well written and compelling, but because they're too niche, or at the opposite end of the spectrum, because they are too like a book or books on the market. Successful submissions will then be presented by the commissioning editor at an acquisitions meeting, which involves them saying why they think the book is worth publishing, buying, and reading. This discussion will also generally involve other editors and people from other departments, such as production, marketing, and rights. And all of them will be talking in terms of what the book is about, who will buy it, and how it will be marketed. At this point, the sales representatives, who will later pitch the book to the bookshops, will give their opinions. This is another major hurdle for a new submission, because the bookshop buyers will only take a minority of the books they're offered by the publishing houses, and this will have a knock-on effect on the sales of a book. It is quite difficult to predict how successful a new book by a new author will be, and the publishing companies do sometimes take risks. But, quite often, if the predicted sales of a book suggest it will cost more money to publish than it will make, a book is likely to be rejected at this stage. If the figures work and a strategy for the book can be agreed, the author is then offered a contract. In exchange for the rights to the book, the publisher agrees to pay the author a percentage of the profits of the sales. This is the royalties, and an advance. This is where the author receives some of their royalties in advance, i.e. before the book goes on sale. The publisher then keeps the majority of the profits because they pay for the book to be produced, and therefore they take the financial risk. The book will then be passed on to a structural editor who will look at the content of the book and the overall story, and then a copy editor who will make sure the sentences flow and make sense, and that the whole thing is free of grammar or spelling errors and formatted correctly. While the book is being edited, the designers will be putting together the front and back cover, and the marketing team will be putting together the marketing material to go alongside the book, along the lines of why people should buy it. Once the book is finished, it is typeset. That means that the words are arranged as they would be on the pages of the book, and any diagrams or pictures are put in the right places. It is then the job of the proofreader to go through the proofs, these are the pages produced by the typesetter, and check for any last-minute errors or problems. By the time the actual printed, bound copies of the book arrive, the sales representatives will already have told the bookshops about it, and why they should buy it, and why their customers will definitely want to read it. And then hopefully people will start buying it. There is a lot more to the various parts of this process, and a lot more people involved in running a publishing company, which I didn't have time to include just now. I will come back to publishing in session 12, Submission and Beyond, which will also include the role of a literary agent and how self-publishing works. In the meantime, I recommend researching the publishing industry, publishing companies, and how they work. You'll notice a common thread running through the publishing process, which centres around the question, who will buy this book and why? The people who are most likely to buy your book are your target audience. As I've said before, books are often bought by people outside of that target audience, but that is still where the bulk of the sales will come from. So the publisher needs to know who that is in order to decide if there's a big enough market to make it worth taking the risk of publishing the book. And quite simply, the person who's likely to buy your book is someone who thinks they're going to enjoy reading it. And most people approach this with some sort of criteria. They will buy a book because they think it is the kind of book they like to read. So you need to ask yourself, what kind of book have you written? And this is so important for a first-time novel, because buying your book over one by an established author is more of a risk for the reader. And if the reader can't work out what kind of book it is, they're less likely to know whether or not they're going to enjoy reading it, and therefore they're less likely to buy it. Bear in mind, they have thousands of others to choose from. That also means that the bookshops are less likely to stock it, and the publishers are less likely to publish it. To decide what kind of book you've written or are writing, and in order to describe it to someone else, it helps to think in terms of age group, genre, similar books, and what the book promises. So firstly, age group. Put simply, you need to decide whether your book is aimed at adults, young adults, or children. And if your book is aimed at children, you need to narrow down the age range to about 3 years. Number 2, genre. It's also a good idea to identify the genre of your book. It might be a straightforward science fiction or crime novel, or it might combine genres, such as a romantic comedy or a historical thriller. I recommend familiarising yourself with the different genres, at least with the ones connected to your writing, and the characteristics of those genres, and then deciding how best to describe the genre of your book. This can be quite difficult, but it's an important way of communicating to the reader what kind of thing to expect in the story. And you can't stand behind every potential customer in the bookshop and explain it to them, and I don't suggest you try. Number 3. Similar books. Also try and find books that are already on the market that are like your book. It can help when pitching a book if you can compare it to preferably successful books that are already on sale. That isn't to suggest you should find an existing best-selling book and rewrite it. But if you can name books that are similar to yours, it shows you've done your research and it indicates that there is a market for that sort of book. Also, readers will often look for a book that is like a book they've already read and enjoyed. If you can't identify the genre or any similar books, it suggests your book is quite niche, and this is likely to put a publisher off publishing it. Number 4. This can be summarised in one question. What does your book promise? All books should keep a reader reading, but different books will do this in different ways. So, based on the kind of book you're writing, what does the book promise your reader? If a book doesn't promise anything, or the potential reader is unsure what a book promises, they're a lot less likely to be convinced that they're going to enjoy reading it, and would therefore more likely to put it down and spend their money on something else. So, you've written your novel, you know what it's about and who it's aimed at. The next thing you need to know is it any good? Whether or not a book is good depends on whether it delivers what it promises. So does it do what it says on the tin? Has the author achieved what they set out to? And does the reader, the consumer, the client get what they're looking for, the reason they bought the book? Once you've done all your research, you know what you're writing, who you're writing it for, and why they would want to buy it, you need to make sure your manuscript delivers what it promises. And most first drafts, probably all actually, will still be a work in progress. They will not yet be good enough to be picked up by a publisher or to compete on the market. So then you need to edit your manuscript. How does that work? Over the next 5 sessions, I'll be going through the editing process, keeping that idea in mind of making sure your manuscript delivers what it promises. Starting with big things like structure, character, voice, which can require major rewrites, and working down to line by line editing and polishing, and then submitting your manuscript to a literary agent or a publisher. I'll be drawing from material covered in the first half of the course, but in greater detail and in such a way that enables you, the viewer, to apply this to your own writing. To make the most of this process, therefore, I recommend you have a piece of writing you can work on. This can be a novel or part of a novel, or even just a short story. The idea is for you to be able to analyse your own writing, to understand what each part of your story is meant to do in terms of the purpose it serves and how it contributes towards the overall story. Also to be able to assess whether or not you've been successful in this and how to alter it if you haven't. This is really difficult, and you will probably require a fresh pair of eyes and the input of a professional editor at some stage. But being able to edit your own work is essential in order to improve. And if you can get it to a high standard before you submit, you give your book a far better chance of being able to navigate the tricky road to publication and achieving success beyond that. Please don't be put off by all this. Writing is incredibly exciting and rewarding, for many of us addictive. But writing for the market, writing to be published and even make money, is very difficult. It requires a lot of hard work, patience, and the ability to accept and apply criticism. You are actually better off writing because you want to write, and you want to write well, rather than because you want to get something published as soon as possible. And if you do that, perhaps ironically, you are more likely to produce something that is worth publishing, buying, and reading. Next month, I'll be looking at structural solutions in session 8 of our 12-part novel writing programme. The video will be online, on our website and on YouTube from Wednesday the 3rd of February. In the meantime, do check out our website, www.writeressentials.com, for details about our live classes, our feedback services, and how to donate to the production of these videos. Happy writing!